I'm currently absorbed in making a set of cabinets for a new kitchen. This isn't a difficult project. Cabinets are nothing more than boxes with doors and drawers. But it is a big project. Even a small kitchen can include a dozen or more cabinets. So I've employed several hacks to help get the best possible result and to make the project go faster. When a project requires multiple assemblies or units, it's extremely important that all these assemblies go together square, flat, and true so they all fit together the way they should. To keep my cabinet units square, I assemble them with these corner squares. The squares are made from plywood, cut 6-inch or 15 centimeter squares from 3/4 inch, that's 19 millimeter thick plywood. Check each one to make sure that the corners are all precisely 90 degrees, then cut them into triangles. How many should you make? Well, you want to keep at least a dozen on hand, and if you're doing multiple glue-ups, you may need a good many more. Notch the corners so the plywood will stay clear of any glue squeeze out, then drill 1 inch, that's 25 millimeter diameter holes for the clamps. Quick tip, C-clamps have a movable jaw with a pad at the end. And if you don't insert a wooden caul between the pad and whatever you're trying to clamp, these pads can leave a nasty dimple in the wood. Trouble is, trying to keep the cauls in place while you're tightening the C-clamp can be a particularly frustrating endeavor. So, to keep from losing my religion 3 times a minute, I take some goop or some shoe goo and I adhere the caul to the pad. Problem solved. Large cabinet assemblies may require corner squares on all 4 corners. But for smaller assemblies, such as this hanging cupboard, you can get by with just squares on 2 diagonal corners. And by the way, corner squares aren't just for glue-ups. They're extremely handy for test assemblies. You can use them to secure the parts temporarily, holding large assemblies together while you test fit all the pieces. You can also square your assembly by carefully arranging your clamps. This is handy if for some reason you can't use corner squares, or more likely, you run out of them. Let's say you clamp a cabinet together and it's slightly off square. 2 corners more than 90 degrees, and the other 2 less than. Place one of your clamps so that it stretches across 2 corner joints at a slight diagonal. One pad on the right side of the corner, and the other pad on the left side of the opposite corner. Loosen the other clamps so they're snug, but not too tight. Now slowly tighten the diagonal clamp while you check the assembly with a square. As the clamp gets tight, the angle at the corners will change. If the angles get worse, that is, the cabinet gets more and more out of square, switch the diagonal right for left and try again. You'll quickly find a clamp arrangement that keeps the cabinet perfectly square. If you use this method, put your diagonal clamps as close to the corner joints as you possibly can. If you put them too far away, the parts will bow under the clamping pressure and there won't be any way for you to tell if the corners are really square. Not all cabinets are simple boxes. If your project calls for corner cabinets, these have their own special assembly problems, especially if the faces are at 45 degrees to the walls to which they will be mounted. Fortunately, almost all of these assembly problems can be solved with a few simple wooden cauls. The first thing that you need is a way to hold the corner cabinet so that it's easy to work on. A log buck works great for this. A buck is a series of X-shaped frames arranged to hold big logs while you saw them up. And it's just what you need to easily assemble a corner cabinet. I usually start by assembling the backs and the top and bottom shelves. Then I add the 2 sides. In my designs, the sides have angled edges at the front. To clamp these parts to the back without damaging the angled edges, I've made cauls with angled cutouts that fit the edges of the sides. Clamping the face frame in place requires 2 special cauls, one to hold the face frame to the sides and another to hold the face frame to the top and bottom shelves. The second caul is nothing more than a stick with angled ends that I wedge against the sides. And here it is, all glued up. All the adjoining surfaces have sufficient pressure to form a good glue bond, and there are no clamps perched on angled surfaces that might slide off if you looked at them crossways. While we're talking about corner cabinets, let me call your attention to these odd 5-sided shelves that form part of the assembly. Now obviously, these all must be cut precisely the same in order for the units to fit together properly. Now there are several ways to do this, but my solution is to use a horizontal fence. Initially, cut the shelves square, then carefully mark the corners where you will cut them to form the 5th edge. Attach a guide to a shelf with carpet tape. Quick tip, if you're wondering why I'm hitting the guide with a dead blow hammer after I line it up, it's because the carpet tape has a pressure-sensitive adhesive. Set up the horizontal fence so the edge is precisely even with the edge of the saw teeth away from the fence. This particular horizontal fence has a clearance of 3 inches, that's 7.5 centimeters, between its edge and the vertical fence to which it's attached. So you need to reduce the width of the cutoff with a saber saw or hand saw. After you've trimmed the cutoff, saw the shelf to its final dimension, sliding the guide along the edge of the horizontal fence. You can also use a horizontal fence to duplicate parts. For example, we could take this shelf that I just cut, stick it to a sheet of plywood, and use it to cut all 5 sides. However, when using a horizontal fence, there is an important precaution that you must observe. Don't let parts accumulate underneath the fence. That's why I keep a stick handy to clear out those parts after each and every cut. All cabinets that support a work surface or a countertop have a toe space. This is a cutout at the bottom that allows you to stand and work at the countertop without banging your toes against the cabinet. This means that all the cabinet sides must be notched at the bottom front corner. And one of the easiest ways to create these notches is with a router and a flush trim bit. Make a simple L-shaped template from plywood. The arms of this template should be slightly wider than the radius of your router base, and about 2 inches or about 5 centimeters longer and taller than the notch you want to cut. Place the template on the plywood and mark the notch. Using a jigsaw or a handsaw, cut the notch about 1/8 inch or 3 millimeters wide of the marks. Clamp the template to the plywood and mount a flush trim bit in the router. This bit has a guide bearing at the end of the flutes. Trim the notch to its final size using the template to guide the router bit. Then use a file or a rasp to square the inside corners where the router bit can't reach. Not only is this an easy way to create the notches, it helps ensure that all the notches are precisely the same so that the toe spaces line up when you install the cabinets. My cabinet design calls for 2 fixed shelves at the top and the bottom, and all the shelving in between is movable or adjustable. It will rest on these pin-style shelving supports that fit into 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter holes. You drill 4 vertical rows of holes in the cabinet sides, and then you put 4 of these pin supports wherever you want a shelf. It's a simple, versatile system, but it requires precision. Each row of holes must be spaced precisely the same, or the shelves will rock. To get the necessary precision, I made this drill guide out of a scrap of extremely hard oak. Each hole is 1 inch or 25 millimeters from the edge of the guide, and they are spaced 2 inches or 50 millimeters apart. Of course, the spacing doesn't really matter. Because I'm using this guide to position the holes, each vertical row of holes will be exactly the same and exactly the same height. I simply align the guide with the edge of the cabinet side and the dado that will hold the bottom shelf, and then clamp it in place. I've mounted a stop collar to the 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter bit to keep it from drilling completely through the sides. The collar is positioned so that each hole will be just 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters deep. There's one more jig that you need in order for this system to work well. The best time to drill these holes is before you assemble the cabinet, so naturally all the holes are going to get filled with paint and varnish when you finish the cabinet, and not a single one of these shelving supports will fit the holes that you drilled for them. Mount a 1/4 inch or 6mm drill bit in a chisel handle or screwdriver handle like this. Pick the 4 holes where you want to mount the shelf and use the jig to clean them out. Just simply spin the handle a couple of times and the shelving support should slide right into its mounting hole. Once the cabinets are installed and the kitchen is up and cooking, you can put this jig in your junk drawer so that if ever you want to rearrange the shelves, you have it handy. You won't do this, of course, but you'll rest easy that you could if you wanted to. And you might, but you won't.